بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. في البداية أرحب بزميلي السيد أنتوني بلينكن وزير خارجية الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية الصديقة في مدينة الدوحة. نلتقي اليوم في ظل ظروف حرجة ومؤسفة مع استمرار التصعيد في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة وغزة وإسرائيل، ونتابع جميعا هذه التطورات بحزن وقلق بالغين. خضت مع زميلي مباحثات صريحة وعميقة في هذا الشأن، حيث ناقشنا الأبعاد السياسية والإنسانية لهذه الأزمة، وخلال حديثنا أعدت التأكيد على موقف دولة قطر الثابت من إدانة كافة أشكال استهداف المدنيين. وهنا أشدد أن قتل المدنيين الأبرياء خاصة الأطفال والنساء وممارسة سياسة العقاب الجماعي أمر غير مقبول تحت أي ذريعة، ويجب أن تكون هذه الإدانات موجهة إلى كل طرف يتورط في ذلك. وفي هذا الصدد حرصنا منذ اليوم الأول من اندلاع المواجهات إلى السعي لخفض التصعيد والتهدئة وصولا إلى وقف القتال بشكل تام، وذلك لحقن الدماء وتجنيب المنطقة خطر الانزلاق في دائرة عنف أوسع تدفع ثمنها شعوبنا التي أنهكتها الحروب والصراعات. تتمثل أولويات تحركات دولة قطر الدبلوماسية في السعي للوقف الفوري لإطلاق النار وحماية المدنيين وإطلاق سراح الأسرى، والعمل للحد من اتساع رقعة العنف ودائرة النزاع في المنطقة، والتي سيكون لها عواقب وخيمة في حال تمددها. كما تبادلنا وجهات النظر حول سبل فتح ممرات إنسانية لضمان وصول الإغاثة والمساعدات للأشقاء الفلسطينيين العالقين تحت القصف، لا سيما في ظل تدهور الأوضاع بقطاع غزة. وفي هذا الصدد ننوه إلى الوضع المأساوي الذي نراه في غزة، بما في ذلك النقص في المواد الأساسية وانقطاع الكهرباء بسبب القصف الذي يشنع القطاع. وندرك جميعا أننا أمام واقع صعب ومرحلة تستوجب تضافر الجهود والمساعي، لذا نشدد على ضرورة تعزيز جهودنا مع الحلفاء والشركاء وخاصة الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية من أجل تهدئة الأوضاع وتجنيب المدنيين تبعات هذه المواجهات. نحن على يقين بأن السبيل الوحيد للتوصل لحل سلمي وفوري لهذه الأزمة هو إبقاء كافة قنوات الاتصال مفتوحة مع جميع الأطراف المعنية، وأن حل هذه الأزمة يتطلب تعاونا مستمرا ومكثفا، ونثمن الجهود الإقليمية والدولية والأممية التي من شأنها خفض التصعيد. تؤمن دولة قطر إيمانا راسخا بأهمية الوساطة والحوار، وتعتبر ذلك جزءا لا يتجزأ من سياستنا الخارجية، ولطالما سعت دولة قطر إلى إبقاء قنوات التواصل مفتوحة مع مختلف الأطراف في مختلف ساحات الصراع، وهو ما ساهم في ترسيخ مكانة قطر الدولية كشريك موثوق في صناعة السلام. وينبغي لنا أن نشدد هنا بأن التزام دولة قطر بدورها كشريك في صناعة السلام ووسيط في فض النزاعات لا يجب أن يتم استغلاله للإساءة لسمعة بلادي عبر كيل الاتهامات، والتي أثبتت التجارب السابقة زيفها وسوء نية المتاجرين بها. كما نشدد بأن غياب الحل العادل للقضية الفلسطينية سيكون دائما مرافقا لغياب السلام في هذه المنطقة، وعلى المجتمع الدولي أن يضغط باتجاه تحقيق حل عادل وشامل للقضية الفلسطينية في إطار المبادرة العربية، والتي تضمن إقامة دولة فلسطينية مستقلة على حدود عام 1967 وعاصمتها القدس الشرقية، وأن يحصل الأشقاء الفلسطينيين على حقوقهم بشكل نهائي. نتطلع للمواصلة للعمل مع شركائنا في الولايات المتحدة وجهودنا الرامية لخفض التصعيد في الأراضي الفلسطينية المحتلة وإسرائيل وتعزيز أمن واستقرار المنطقة. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله.
Well, good evening. Let me start by expressing my gratitude to the Emir and to the Prime Minister, my friend Mohammed, for, as always, very productive discussions. Qatar has been a very close partner to the United States on a broad range of issues that are crucial to both of our countries and to this region, from working together on evacuating Americans, Afghans, and others from Afghanistan, to cooperating very closely in responding to humanitarian emergencies like the devastating earthquakes in Turkey and in Syria. We're meeting today at what is a difficult but also consequential time for the region. In the wake of Hamas's appalling attack, it killed more than 1,300 Israelis, at least 27 American citizens, and people from more than 30 countries. The United States and Qatar share the goal of preventing this conflict from spreading. We discussed in detail our efforts to prevent any actor, state or non-state, from creating a new front in this conflict. We're also working intensively together to secure the release of hostages, including American citizens, being held by Hamas in Gaza. I'm grateful for the urgency that Qatar is bringing to this effort. I had an opportunity to meet yesterday with the families of some of those being held hostage by Hamas. Their anguish is profound. They're desperate to bring their loved ones home, and we are working urgently on that effort. We're doing that with Qatar, and we're doing that with allies and partners across the region. As Israel continues to respond to Hamas's devastating attacks, the United States will ensure that it has what it needs to defend its people. Secretary of Defense Austin was in Israel today, doing just that, working closely with the Israelis to make sure that we're providing them what they need and that we'll be able to do that on an ongoing basis. At the same time, we're in constant communication with Israeli officials and with multilateral and international organizations, humanitarian organizations, including the United Nations agencies, including the ICRC, to get aid to civilians in Gaza. As I said yesterday in Tel Aviv, Israel has the right, indeed it has the obligation, to defend its people and to try to ensure that Hamas can never repeat what it's done. We continue to discuss with Israel the importance of taking every possible precaution to avoid harming civilians. We recognize that many Palestinian families in Gaza are suffering through no fault of their own, and that Palestinian civilians have lost their lives. We mourn the loss of every innocent life, Israeli, Palestinian, Jew, Christian, Muslim, as well as civilians of every faith and every nationality who've been killed. Let's not lose sight of why this is happening. Israel is conducting operations in Gaza because Hamas carried out terrorist attacks that killed, in the most horrific ways, 1,300 of its people. Hamas terrorists slaughtered, raped, mutilated, tortured, burned innocent civilians, from babies to the elderly, men, women, boys, and girls. Now, efforts to get humanitarian aid into Gaza are complicated by the fact that Hamas continues to use innocent civilians as human shields and is reportedly blocking roads to prevent Palestinians from moving to southern Gaza out of harm's way. We know the humanitarian situation is urgent. We're actively engaged with partners, including Qatar, to get aid to those who need it. Your Excellency, thank you again for today's very, very good discussions and for all the work that our countries have done together. Thank you.
نفتح الآن المجال للأسئلة. السؤال الأول موجه من التلفزيون العربي.
حسام تكلي التلفزيون العربي. السؤال الأول موجه لمعالي رئيس مجلس الوزراء وزير الخارجية القطري. تتداول وسائل الإعلام كثيرة في واقع الأمر أنه تم الاتفاق على تجميد 6 مليارات دولار من أصول إيران هنا في قطر. ما دقة هذه المعلومات؟ السؤال الثاني موجه لمعالي وزير الخارجية الأمريكي سيد أنتوني بلينكن. سيد أنتوني بلينكن، هل علمتم أنتم وفي الإدارة الأمريكية بأن عدد الضحايا في غزة يفوق 1500 ضحية؟ ثلث هؤلاء للأسف من الأطفال. التقارير من هناك تثبت هذا، وأيضا اليونيسف. أسألك بوضوح وأتمنى منك أيضا أن تجيبني بوضوح، ما الذي ستفعله الولايات المتحدة باعتبارها راعية للديمقراطية وحقوق الإنسان في العالم؟ ما الذي ستفعله حتى لا يموت طفل آخر في غزة هذه الليلة؟ شكرا. Thank you.
بالنسبة للسؤال بخصوص تقارير صحفية عن تجميد الأموال الإيرانية في قطر، طبعا هذه أولا دولة قطر تلتزم بأي اتفاق هي طرف فيه، ولا يتم العمل على أي خطوة دون التشاور مع الأطراف.
Qatar will not be used unless all the conditions of the agreement are fulfilled, and we should focus on our priorities, and that is to reduce tension and create a situation of calm and put an end to the current war waged against our brothers in Gaza and reach solutions to avoid any more confrontations and crises.
Thank you for the question. A few things. As I said just a moment ago, and I'll repeat it, Israel has both the right and even the obligation to defend its people, to do everything it can to ensure that Saturday never happens again. At the same time, the way Israel does this matters. The way any democracy has to deal with such a situation matters, and to that end, we've discussed with the Israelis, urged the Israelis to use every possible precaution to avoid harm to civilians. It's also important to remember the fundamental issue that makes this so complicated. As I said again a moment ago, Hamas uses civilians as human shields, puts them in places where they will be in danger, puts them in places where they're used in effect to try to protect Hamas officials or their equipment or infrastructure. Civilians, of course, should not be the target of military operations. They are not the target of Israeli operations. They are very deliberately the target of Hamas's action. I mentioned as well that we're very actively engaged with UN relief agencies, with the ICRC, with others, to address the acute humanitarian needs of people in Gaza, to protect them from harm, and make sure that they have the ability to get what they need. We need to ensure, for example, that there are safe areas in Gaza. For civilians, we're working through the details on that, and more to be said in the days ahead, but that's a priority for us. We're discussing this with the Israeli government. We're discussing it with others in the region.
Second question from Al Jazeera. Good evening. Your Excellency, my name is Ahmed Al Jassim from Al Jazeera. My question pertains to the content of communication. Since the breakout of these hostilities, we know the state of Qatar was keen to make contact with some countries, Iran, the United States, Jordan, France, and other countries. What is the content of these communications, and what are you basing them on? In the previous days, since the outbreak of this crisis, His Highness the Emir has initiated contact, and I have initiated contact with my counterparts. We have specific aims at this stage. We are trying to reduce the tension, and we hope that this war will come to a halt and the humanitarian corridors are secured so that humanitarian aid can reach the Gaza Strip, and also the civilian prisoners who are being taken from Israel. We are working on making sure that they will be released. The role of the state of Qatar focuses on finding solutions for this crisis and avoid the crisis spilling over to other fronts and countries. Our priorities focus on, first of all, stopping the war and making sure humanitarian aid is delivered and the prisoners are returned home. Third question from Reuters.
Thank you. Sheikh Mohammed, given the condemnation from the world on Hamas attack, Is Qatar considering shutting down Hamas bureau? Are you prepared to ask the leadership to leave if your Western allies demand you to do so? And Mr. Secretary, have you asked Qatar to shut down the Hamas office? And if I may, Mr. Secretary, yesterday and just now, you said Israel has a right to defend itself, but you added that how it does that mattered. And you talked about a standard that democracies should strive for even when it's difficult to do so. Today, Israel ordered residents of Gaza City to leave and move south, something UN Palestinian envoy just called a crime against humanity. The translation wasn't great, so the gentleman before me might have asked something similar, but let me push you a little bit more on this. How does that order square with that standard you mentioned and also international law? Does the United States support this relocation? And since you had a conversation with Prime Minister Netanyahu, did you give your blessing for this move? Thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Well, regarding your question about Hamas political office in Doha, right now, actually this office, since it's started, it's being used as a way of communicating and bringing peace and calm to the region, not to instigate any war. And this is the purpose of that office, as long as we are keeping the communication open right now and focusing on putting an end for